Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from today. We are delighted that you could join the session on building resilient water systems, a means to enhance social harmony. The session introduces and explores building resilient water systems as a cornerstone for peace and sustainability. We'll showcase key characteristics, practical strategies, and innovative solutions for building and measuring progress towards resilient water systems, spanning political and hydrological boundaries. Thank you for joining the session. Next slide, please. My name is Greg Brill. I'm the technical lead for the CO Water Mandate and the NBS and Biodiversity lead for the Pacific Institute. It gives me great pleasure today to welcome a number of the key speakers and to introduce the session as well. This will be an online session, so please use the Q&A function throughout the session to pose your questions to either the panelists or to the event organizers as well. We'd be happy to answer those questions throughout the course of the session or respond directly afterwards as well. We have a jam-packed agenda today. We'll start with a welcome and opening remarks. We'll jump across to an overview of a very innovative and pragmatic solution called the Water Resilience Assessment Framework. We'll then have a lightning round of presentations from a variety of different sectors and organizations looking to operationalize resilience in practice. We'll spend the lion's share of today in a panel discussion and then provide some time for Q&A at the end and then some key takeaways and closing. So please welcome me in joining an illustrious group of panelists, including my colleague from the CO Water Mandate, Ashok Chopagain, Benita Matthew from Foresight Canada, John Matthews from the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, Michael Gulich from MGM Resorts International, Sebastian van Uben from the Entire Group, and Tom DeHare from the Entire Group as well. At this point, I believe I'm handing over to John Matthews, who will give us our opening remarks and a general overview of resilience between the climate and water nexus. John, over to you.
Thanks so much, Greg. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
My name is John Matthews. I'm the Executive Director for AGWA, the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. I've been working at the meeting point between water and climate for about 17 years now. The concept of resilience is still an evolving one. It's often in the water world, sometimes in the climate world too, a politely undefined word. And one that we use very frequently, but necessarily without a lot of context and maybe not exploring some of its depth and extent. What we're trying to do here in this space with this session is to demonstrate that resilience is actually something that we can put into practice, that it is a positive quality, that it's a practice that we can implement in the places, within the institutions, within the partnerships where we work. Resilience traditionally often meant, at least in English, to bounce back, to that there would be something negative or bad that would happen to you, and you would try to respond in a way that took you back to the original conditions. The climate community, however, has really pushed the limits on that. Instead of bouncing back, there's almost been an image of how we bounce forward. And the reason for that is that the climate presents a kind of moving target. So how do we really, in practical terms, anticipate the conditions that are forming, not just the ones that the climate impacts that we're experiencing now, direct and indirect, but also the ones that we can anticipate that are headed in the future. In that sense, it's much more difficult to be able to prepare, especially for these kinds of emerging eco-hydrological conditions and setting. And RAF, as you'll hear in the next talk, is one methodology that takes some of the ideas and in a quite advanced way tries to develop a roadmap for pursuing that. I would say most of the work, in contrast to RAF, that we've seen to date about how we adapt and prepare ourselves resiliently is really de-risking. It's how we try to minimize negative impacts from climate change. So you might be thinking about sea level rise, or you might be thinking about increased intensity and extent of flooding or droughts. However, the climate community has really been important in terms of the set of insights that they've given the rest of the world in terms of thinking about systems and us also about thinking about not just reducing negative risks, but also trying to think about what we need to be headed towards. What are the positive qualities that we're moving towards? In that sense, while de-risking is an important quality of resilience, what I would argue actually is maybe a more useful, potentially more optimistic way of talking about these ideas is in terms of how do we make sure that we are thriving in spite of change, and thriving with that change. And in particular, we're especially concerned about the issues around a word that is quite widespread in the climate change community, but is really just starting to break out into the rest of the world. And that's the challenge around transformation. The transformation is the idea that actually many of the climate impacts are not necessarily small and discrete, they're not necessarily isolated, but that they're occurring across a whole system, and that system itself, ecological, biophysical, institutional, regulatory, is actually in quite rapid motion. And in some parts of the world, transformation is already very far along. Places like the Tibetan Plateau or the Himalayas, the Andes, Switzerland, that kind of system level change, the big changes can happen quite suddenly. And that is not the responses that we might have to incremental impacts are going to be quite different than the ones that we might have for transformational impacts. What we're really talking about today is how you organize yourself in that shifting, quite unfamiliar landscape, and use resilience as this kind of new organizing principle for your work. And for that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ashok, and he's going to provide you with a sense of where that roadmap takes you. Thank you very much.
Hello there. Can you hear me well? Greg, just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you, Ashok.
So that's how it's going to change now. Somehow I don't manage to open my video. Michaela, can you help me with that one, please?
Yes. So if you click on the video down to the left.
Yeah, it does. Let me do that.
Otherwise, just proceeds with the slides.
I'll just proceed. I mean, don't worry about that. I mean, I'll just go with the slide. So don't want to take much time. Good morning, afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am Ashok Chapagan, like Greg mentioned earlier, project coordinator of Water Resilience Assessment Framework. The project helps build system-wide resilience, and the project started in 2020. In 2021, we launched the overarching framework RAF, WRAF, developed by a team of experts from Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, International Water Management Institute, IMI, World Resources Institute, Pacific Institute, CEO Water Mandate. The project is seed funded from BSP, supported by Swiss Development Corporation and CEO Water Mandate endorsing companies. It is supported by multi-stakeholder engagement process organized under a stakeholder advisory group of 25 experts, and the project has been evolving since its inception in 2020. So in a nutshell, what is RAF? Like John mentioned earlier, it's about understanding existing risk assessment that means uncertainty, unpredictability of future water challenges. RAF works with existing frameworks and approaches to address uncertainty in the dynamic nature of the system resilience. So it provides different practical steps to build water resilience. The RAF, the water resilience assessment framework, can also be applied at different levels. It can be applied in a modular fashion, collectively at system level, or starting from one small site all the way to supply chain, for example, for businesses. You can start small and build up as you go. So there are 4 key steps in the RAF. Visualize the system, develop resilience strategy, test the system resilience, evaluate the outcome and results, and improve. So I will just quickly go over these steps very quickly, just give some glimpses of what can be done, what could be done within those steps in the next few slides. So, for example, in step 1, when we talk about visualizing the system, when you start RAF assessment, in this step, we identify key factors affecting the water system. For example, we can understand what are the challenges in that particular basin. It could be shear water challenges, it could be shocks and stresses that are impacting these challenges, are drivers driving these challenges. So understanding the system, visualizing the boundaries, where exactly the assessment is happening. So who are the stakeholders in the basin? Who should be engaged in at what level? So all this, the kind of background information, the state of the basin is defined within this step 1. It also defines potential shocks, drivers of the changes. Some of the things can change incrementally, for example, temperature and climate change, but it can also bring about shocks, which you cannot predict. So it's about being resilient in those changing environment. So finally, in step 1, we establish what are the water status and trends. How is it changing? If it is changing, are there any anticipated shocks and stresses? So how, for example, how water scarcity is changing? What is the water pollution level in the basin? So all those things are compiled within the step 1 of this framework. In step 2, which is about developing a resilience strategy, it has a number of sub-steps. I will not elaborate all the steps here because we have limited time. I will just highlight a couple of things. What is a resilient system? It has 6 characteristics. We define these characteristics as having robustness, which is it can withstand shocks, having redundancy in the system, it has backups, having flexibility in the system, it can adapt to changes, having some degree of integration in the system, meaning that it can work together as a whole. It has inclusiveness, it has justice and equity. So these 6 characteristics of resilient systems are essential to improve if you want to build long-term resilience. Any organization or business or basin authorities or utilities can choose any one of these characteristics or all the characteristics and prioritize which is important for them based on their context. For example, a company wishing to undertake comprehensive analysis of its resilience may select all 6 characteristics or can start with, for example, robustness and redundancy, meaning that want to strengthen this system with respect to robustness or develop some redundancy. Maybe if the company has a history of injustice in their system, they might want to address inclusiveness and just and equity. So these 6 resilience characteristics are key to building resilience. So it's a very simple diagram. It's a kind of stepwise approach where you have resilience characteristics that I mentioned earlier, those 6 characteristics. You can have different system components, for example, socioeconomic component, institutional component, and biophysical component. You can choose any one of the component or all the components in the system where you want to build the resilience. For example, for robustness, in this example, you could choose, for example, biophysical system component. Within biophysical system component, you might have different aspects of biophysical component. Supplies, about having structural integrity, sufficiency of water availability, water pollution level, all those biophysical components could be within that one. And all these different components can be measured using appropriate resilience indicators. So you can measure, for example, water pollution level using water pollution indicators. So there are two tiers of indicators in this water resilience assessment framework, tier 1 and tier 2. What we mean here by tier 1 is very high level indicator. So all those 6 characteristics, you can have kind of one high level assessment where you are the most weakest or the strongest, and then you find out which characteristics you want to build. But it doesn't give you detailed assessment of what needs to be done. In that case, you need to use tier 2 indicators. So tier 2 indicators are more detailed indicators. It can help us define goal. It can help us develop resilience action. Without going into detail, this screenshot shows you one example of resilience characteristics, redundancy, and couple of system components. But there are more than 150 resilience indicators developed within one Excel tool, which is called REST, R-E-S-T. So you can go and download that tool from the website. In step 3, once you develop resilience indicator, you would go and check the state of the resilience now using the selected resilience indicators and the characteristics. That is step 3.1. That's the benchmarking. You benchmark the current level of resilience. And you will come back to step 3 again once you develop resilience action, meaning that if you find out, for example, you are weak in one or two of these areas, I'll just quickly skip this one, developing resilience action, and I'll take you to this next slide, where we have an example from corporate setting where you have, for example, one column in the first table, the 1, 2, 3, fourth column without resilience action. You could see some of them are orange, some of them are green, and some of them are red. Those with green are excellent. For example, institutional system component for regulation, that is about practicality and applicability of the legal and policy framework, is excellent even without any further resilience action for that particular situation. So it will remain resilient in the change situation as well. That's the understanding. But some of the other aspect, for example, governance is low. If you don't take any action, it will remain low. But in other orange, which are like in the traffic light system, wait and assess, you could become highly resilient with some resilience action. So this is how we use the test the system resilience. So that's 3.1. Don't worry about the font size and all those things. You don't need to read it. It is a screenshot from the REST tool. You can go and download the tool. This can help user to find and assess their resilience. There are more than 150 resilience indicators in this tool for all the settings. Finally, as step 4, you are going to evaluate all the things done, the results of the assessment, and try to repeat the same process. If it is not resilient enough, you go and revise strategy. Maybe your context setting is wrong, your resilience actions are not sufficient, and then you revisit the RAF regularly when conditions change. There are a number of tools and resources available from the project. We have already published main guidance document, main RAP framework, and 3 guidance, sector-specific guidance documents, one for utilities, one for corporates, one for river basin managers and water authorities. This report, guidance for basin managers and planning authorities, it just launched today, so you can go and have a look. It's fresh out of the window, so just grab it now. So finally, if you like to engage and then pilot this process, we invite you to join us, and then the contact details are on the screen. And thank you very much. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you. MGM Resorts is a global gaming and entertainment company. We are publicly traded and a Fortune 300 company. You can click to the next slide, please. We have hotels and casinos, meeting and conference areas, entertainment and restaurants. The majority of our operations are located in Las Vegas, where we operate 13 resorts. To give you a sense of scale, we're the largest private employer in the state of Nevada, as well as the largest taxpayer in the state. We have 7 regional properties throughout 7 other U.S. states, from Detroit to Atlantic City, New Jersey, down to Biloxi, Mississippi. We operate 2 resorts in China. We're building Japan's first integrated gaming resort, which should open in 2030. Through our Focused on What Matters platform, we are committed to creating a more sustainable future while striving to make a difference in the lives of our employees, guests, and the communities in which we operate. Next slide, please. We've been focused on water conservation for a couple of decades now, and we have set a goal to reduce our water use intensity on a square foot basis by 30% by 2025, and then 35% by 2030 from a 2007 baseline. I'm happy to communicate that we actually achieved our 2030 goal last year, 7 years early, and we'll be working over the coming quarters to reset that goal. Next slide, please. Our conservation work has focused on operational efficiency and conservation in our direct operations, and has included things like a focus on our fixtures, our flush and flow fixtures, our landscape irrigation, our cooling towers, and other operational efficiencies. But over the past 2 years, we've broadened our focus to shift from just water conservation and direct operations to a water stewardship mindset. And this journey began with the development of a water white paper back in 2022, where we took a data-driven and research-informed approach to understand the condition of water in the jurisdictions in which we operate. And that led to the development of a global water policy, which covers issues of governance, compliance, efficiency, operations, but importantly, broadens our focus to encouraging our guests, employees, suppliers, and partners to focus on issues of water, as well as advocating for water policy. In February of 2023, our CEO endorsed the CEO Water Mandate. We were the first gaming and first Las Vegas-based company to do so. Next slide, please. Part of that water white paper was the development of this strategic framework that really guides our initiatives and our focus on water, shifting from direct operations and measurement and efficiency on the left that we've done for historically, to focus on the supply chain, thinking about the basins in which we operate. We've mapped the basins for our different locations and looked into the issues, and that they are different depending on where we are, but also contemplating and focusing on public policy and community engagement. A couple of initiatives that I'll share briefly that speak to this issue of culture and citizenship. We have business resource groups and employee network groups throughout our locations. One of them, Planet Protectors, is focused on issues of sustainability in the environment, and there's a focus on water amongst this group. It's a large group, has been growing rapidly over the past couple of years since it was formed, and we regularly do volunteer activities with our staff in the locations in which we operate, which range from cleanups of watersheds and different parks, but also tree plantings as well, and learnings on water. Next slide, please. For World Water Day earlier this year, the company announced a $500,000 donation to the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which is our local water agency. And the purpose of these dollars is to enhance existing residential water conservation rebates that the agency has in place for MGM employees. And so where the authority is offering this year $5 a square foot to remove turf grass at your home, MGM Resorts is adding $1 to that per square foot for our staff. And additionally, the agency is offering a 50% rebate for smart irrigation controllers and leak detector units. And we've matched that and offer the other 50% to our staff. So they effectively would get the equipment for free. Additionally, we made conservation retrofit kits available for our employees as well, for our staff who are renting as opposed to owning their own home. Next slide, please. For that last program, we are tracking the water saved through the dollars that we've invested in the program. And then lastly, I'll just mention really briefly a partnership with Las Vegas Grand Prix, Southern Nevada Water Authority, WaterStart, and us, MGM Resorts, where we've combined an atmospheric water generator with one of our cooling towers to create water from thin air to offset the consumptive water being used by the event. So just a couple examples of how we're broadening our focus to water stewardship and thinking more broadly about culture and citizenship. Thank you.
Bonita, over to you now.
Thanks, Ashok. Hello, everyone joining the session today. My name is Benita Matthew. I'm with Foresight Canada, and I manage the WaterNext and AgriNext sector-specific initiatives. You can go to the next slide. Perfect. A little bit about Foresight. We help the world do more with less sustainably. We are Canada's largest clean tech innovation and adoption accelerator, and we help de-risk and simplify public and private sector adoption of the world's best clean tech. We support over 1,200 ventures. We've collaborated with over 2,000 stakeholders, rights holders, and partners, both on the domestic and international levels. And this includes our partnership with Pacific Institute. Next slide, please. Now onto WaterNext, Foresight's sector-specific initiative. We bring together stakeholders from across the water innovation ecosystem to increase the adoption of those market-ready solutions for the world's most pressing water challenges. Next slide. We envision Canada as the best place in the world to develop and commercialize those innovative water technologies to serve those challenges that we're facing. And our goal is to help Canada achieve around less than 10% municipal and industrial water loss by 2033. We call it our under 10 in 10 promise, and that's a big goal, but we really believe in the Canadian water tech ecosystem and all the innovative solutions coming out of Canada. Next slide. Now, a little bit about the Canadian water context in understanding why it's important to delve into that for a resilient green economy. We consider water scarcity, climate change, and population growth as some of the big leading problems in Canada. And just kind of like reviewing Canada's water resources, it's abundant but unevenly distributed. So utilizing natural freshwater resources is really difficult to do so in the context of where said resources are and located, and getting them into major urban areas across Canada. Furthermore, with Canada accounting for about 20% of the world's freshwater resources, only about 7% of that supply is actually renewable. So some of the current challenges that we're facing include aging infrastructure, water pollution, and regional water scarcity. So decision-making processes take time, leading to delays in updating infrastructure in cities as cities expand. Water pollution issues occur, and fine example is the contamination of the Great Lakes, as well as the contamination of water resources around or near mining areas. And then around water scarcity, the issue of water scarcity, it does exist, especially in the areas of the northern part of Canada. So we also consider the role of water in the Canadian economy. Of course, there's a significant amount of water that's utilized in a couple of different industries in Canada, including the ag industry, the mining industry, and the resource industry that stand out the most. Next slide. Now to look at a business case study. recently completed by Foresight on smart building water management in Canada. It can be considered as a clean tech solutions opportunity for a resilient green economy. So Canadian studies revealed that municipal water and wastewater systems tend to be the largest energy consumers within municipalities, which account for an average of 38% of total energy use. So implementing smart water technologies that minimize water losses in residential buildings, for example, present a really great and strategic opportunity with a significant return on investment. Next slide, please. Here are just a few companies that we work with across Canada and their innovative tech solutions working on resilient urban water saving solutions. Rainstick is a Canadian company based out of BC, as well as in Ontario. That's the only sustainable recirculating high pressure shower in North America. So water gets captured, cleaned, and upcycled all in one smooth process. Orca is based out of BC, and they're focusing on usage monitoring, leak detection software for buildings, and consumption analysis, as well as water conservation. Next slide. SolidWorks, also based out of BC, they focused on industrial wastewater reuse applications. So they have selective contaminant removal, minimal liquid discharge, and zero liquid discharge solutions that they're providing to municipalities. And Proteus Industries focuses on water recycling solutions and mainly specifically around water recovery and reuse on economic business models. So this is just a couple of companies that we work with that are supporting building a green resilient economy in Canada. I'm happy to speak more about that in our panel in a few minutes. Back to you, or over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Bonita. Sebastian, the floor is yours now.
Yes, hello. Hello, my name is Sebastian van Uppen. I'm an advisor in spatial planning policy in Flanders, in the country of Belgium. Next slide, please. Oh, can you still hear me? Damn it.
We can hear you, Sebastian.
Ah, yeah, you can still hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Next
Yes,
slide,
I
please.
think we
Yeah.
lost Asho.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So just 1 minute,
okay.
and maybe he'll be back.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Sebastian.
Yes. Hello.
You can continue now. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. You can go to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about the case in Flanders to showcase the concept of building resilience at the level of a watershed and the policy shift and implementation towards a systems approach to water management. Next slide, please. Flanders, and by extent the Netherlands, do have actually an interesting relationship with water and the way water was managed throughout the centuries. Actually, that profoundly made the landscape in the way it is today. But history in Flanders of taking more and more land from the river and more land from the sea made large part of Flanders prone to flooding. And to combat the susceptibility towards flooding today, a mindset shift is encouraged by our policy, which present quotes like "no water security without a systems approach." Next slide, please. But that's where we are today. In the second half of the 20th century, Flanders already started with a basin-wide plan to manage flooding along the river Scheldt. The plan was called Sigma Plan, and it included building dikes, levees, implementing flood control areas along the tidal river, local depoldering, were implemented to give more space for the floodwater if it would occur. Next slide, please. But interestingly, at the same time period, in the second half of the 20th century, about 75% of the wetlands in Flanders were lost. And the current wetlands are still there, or often in a more or less degraded state. Next slide, please. So today, we are actually not only confronted with a high susceptibility towards flooding in Flanders, but we are also confronted with a situation where we are more prone to drought. So today there's a new policy context with, for example, the Blue Deal and a report called the Resilient Waterlands made up by an expert panel, which encourages this shift mindset to a more systemic approach, where, for example, you think not only you don't only think about a place where the flooding is occurring, but you think on a wider range at the landscape level, and you look for places where you can retain more water, how we can make sure that rivers and the water towards the rivers, that the flow is reduced, and also that the rivers get more space to be able to flood. And even quite interestingly, I found in the Resilient Waterland report, there's actually a quote that builds further on that, and that says the systems approach remains a noble ambition if it's not institutionalized into the capillaries of our thinking and actions. Next slide, please. So policy and action in Flanders, it's not standing still, and I want to use the remaining time to talk about a case in Flanders that really embraces this systemic approach towards water management, and that tried to develop a trajectory to make a river basin more resilient. And this trajectory or this plan is called the Top Dender program. Next slide, please. So to clarify, the Dender is actually a river in Belgium, and it has a basin around it, of course, and it's situated, you can see there, the situation situated in Belgium. You can see on the left map. On the right map, you see the basin again situated west of Brussels. Next slide, please. And what is interesting about this case is that the river of the Dender Basin is actually a very good example of a rain-fed river with a quick water runoff due to elevation differences in the south. So there are high peak flows in the river, and also increased flood susceptibility along the borders of the river. And through the decades, changes in land use, increasing urbanization, the resulting fragmentation of nature, and the increasing impact of climate change actually resulted in a lot of flooding across the river Dender that you can see central in the basin. So the first study actually quite interestingly showed that if you want to find a solution for the flooding urban areas along the Dender River, there isn't actually enough space along the river for all the floodwater to go to. We would have to deconstruct the urban areas in order to give room for the floodwater in order to protect the urban areas. So we needed a new way of thinking to combat these flooding risks, and so there was need for a more cohesive vision where we would look not only to the river itself but to the landscape around it. And then the Dender program came along, and with it we didn't only wanted to tackle flooding problems, but also we wanted to connect fragmented patches of nature. We wanted to look into how we could combat more erosion problems, reduce heat island effects in urban areas, and so on. Next slide, please. So how did we do that? First of all, we have a kind of technical approach based on GIS software, where we try to look into the landscape and try to build up a kind of map that kind of represents the system and from the different landscape layers of the region. This allowed us to have a kind of framework that kind of highlights the opportunities and the problems that occurred in this system. And we also call it scaling through the basin, because we started with the river itself, and then we scaled up through the whole basin to highlight the problems, and then we scaled back in to different subsections of the basin to kind of visualize this more this systemic this landscape system and the problems and opportunities that arise with it. Next slide, please. So, but in Flanders, actually, there is a lot of policy already present, and there's a lot of knowledge already present. But the problem is that there are a lot of things that are happening to try to improve the resilience of different water basins. A lot of things that are happening are not connected to each other. They're kind of ad hoc measures. So our approach actually allowed us to not to think too much about administrative borders, and that was quite an opportunity, because normally when you want to try improve resilience for a region, you have to talk to the municipality and so on. We did talk to the municipality, but we didn't use the framework or the borders of a municipality to find solutions. We looked at the whole morphology and the whole landscape of the area. And we took our maps to actually a quite intensive workshop series of different stakeholders were added together. They could where they could fill in their local knowledge. And also the interesting part was when you put together a lot of different stakeholders from a region to think about what systemic solutions we can implement to increase the resilience of a water basin. These stakeholders will also network, and that's quite interesting, because when they network, there's an opportunity for them to form coalitions, and when they form coalitions, you have more. You are more sure that the actions that are presented in this program are actually going to be implemented later on in the fields. Okay, so that was it. Thank you very much. Up to the next.
Thank you, Sebastian. It's an excellent presentation. Thank you, all the speakers. I think it's time for us to have more detailed discussion around that. John Matthews from Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, he is going to moderate the session, panel discussion, and close the session finally once the panel discussion is over. Over to you, John.
Great. Thanks so much, Ashok. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists, including another addition, Tom Dyer, also from Anteo Group, to be able to weigh in. And if we have some time, take some questions from you, the audience, and then have some concluding remarks. I'd like to start with Michael, then I go to Bonita, and then Tom. Michael, I was really struck as a business. MGM Resorts, it doesn't automatically come to probably most people that you're making water-related decisions, and you're maybe a lot of people are not familiar with where you're located in North America, but it's a very arid, semi-arid region. Water scarcity has been a problem for a long time. But I was really struck when I was listening to you about how you were investing in some of the local institutions in Southern Nevada, that you were also really encouraging your employees and other partners to also be good citizens. These are core concepts actually inside of RAF as a kind of system level stakeholder engagement kind of insight. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how MGM Resorts really came to that kind of insight, that resilience was something that actually extended beyond the boundaries of the company itself.
Yeah, thank you, John. We are deeply invested in the communities in which we operate, and that's for a couple of reasons. But I would say the primary one is that's where our staff live. Literally, that's where we live. And as you said, with our critical mass of operations in Las Vegas, it is we're located in the driest desert in North America. So water is kind of a natural issue for us to be focused on. But we've really pivoted over the past couple of years more to that water stewardship approach. And by being deeply committed to the communities in which we operate, it means we're deeply committed to the basins in which we operate. And I think that focus shift has really gone to three areas. One is just that, the basins. And so what are the environmental issues in all of the locales that we operate, but also then the community and the guests and the staff. And so how do we engage with them? How do we educate them? how do we hopefully bring them along on our water stewardship journey. And some of the things I talked about, in terms of the enhanced rebate, we're really, hopefully communicating to our staff how important this is to us, right? We're putting our money where our mouth is in terms of that commitment, and saying we don't want you to just focus on these issues at work, but also at home. And then finally, in the supply chain, and so we've recently concluded a water risk assessment with an Environmental Defense Fund Climate Corps fellow, looking at where our risks and vulnerabilities are from a water perspective in the supply chain.
Great answer, and I think it's really powerful, the kind of comprehensive approach that you all have taken. I'd like to turn now to Bonita. I am struck a little bit, I have to say, by the irony of moving from one of the driest parts of North America to one of the wettest countries in the world, and also in North America and with Canada. And I was really struck in your presentation. You of course have a very strongly technological focus, but technology, I think, is really another way of saying these are specialized decision-making approaches. They're a way to mobilize solutions and help extend the fingerprints of our decision-making processes. And what I am curious about is I also, borrowing an insight from RAF itself. I was really interested in how some of the technologies you were talking about, they were really trying to draw links in the kind of connective tissue of water, how water is connected to energy, how water is connected to utilities in the broader economic system. Can you talk a little bit about this kind of system level approach to water that Water Next has approached, and how you use it as an investment and engagement strategy?
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest context is, of course, Canada's abundant freshwater resources are a significant asset, but there is a need for long-term water resilience, and it's still critical for several reasons. Climate change is threatening water security, and that resilience of our water systems is going to become increasingly important. So, of course, with shifting weather patterns, there's been an increase in the frequency of extreme weather events and shifting water availability. So, for example, some regions in Canada have been facing more intense storms and flooding, and then others are facing prolonged droughts and wildfires. So finding technical solutions that can support, the prevention, or at least the mitigation and adaptation around these situations, is key for Canada. We're also looking at Canada's population growth, and urbanization is definitely a pressing issue, as there is an increased demand for utilizing potable and non-potable water. So with those expansions, that's leading to higher water consumption and stress on existing water infrastructure. So managing that demand is going to require forward-thinking policies, as well as infrastructure investments and investments in the clean tech ecosystem. Those water tech solutions are kind of at the forefront of supporting the economy, supporting Canada's capability to be water resilient. So those are some key things that I've been seeing. Other things to consider is, of course, the ecosystem side of things. Ecosystem health, biodiversity preservation is going to be key for healthy freshwater ecosystems, are definitely crucial for everybody. So ensuring water resilience is going to help maintain those habitats, as well as, delving more into water quality. So it's essential for both ecosystem health as well as human use. Making sure that we have solutions that are counteracting contaminants from agriculture as well as industry and urban areas is going to be important. It is already important, but it's going to be even more important as we move into kind of an unknown scenario when it comes to climate change mitigation and adaptation. Back to you.
No, great answer, Bonita. And I think what you're really trying to say is that this shift towards longer term thinking, it means that you're starting to place the these pieces of technology along that pathway moving forward. And it's interesting how there's really no easy water that's left, right? It's where in any part of the world, even in a water abundant economy like Canada is normally seen, the system itself is changing, and we need to move into that longer term framework. So thank you very much. And Tom, you following up on Sebastian's excellent talk, you and the team at Ontea have for some time been working on this idea of watershed resilience, that we need to move to larger scales. I really liked how Sebastian talked about the kind of historic shifts that have occurred in Flanders and in the Low Countries of Northern Europe more generally. I also was struck how Sebastian made the point that there's, well, you have 1,000 years of history with floods, you maybe only have about 20 years of history with droughts. And the system itself is shifting in part because of climate change, but also because of other types of impacts too, as land use change, ecological change, and so on. What I'd like to ask you, Tom, is about a word that I heard Sebastian use that I like very much, this idea of a vision. Like bringing different stakeholders together to say what is possible in this place. And I think that's interesting. Normally in the past, we might have isolated droughts with one silo and flooding in another. We might have separated land use change from climate impacts. How do you think that this idea of a vision of what can be in a place is informing what resilience means in Flanders?
Yes, thank you, John. So I think in terms of a vision, I think it starts by understanding the system, and it's understanding indeed the nature of change. Where we of course had institutions that have been managing water systems in Flanders and the Netherlands and most countries. Some of these institutions go back centuries already. But are not necessarily still apt to what we have to manage today, and the change that the context in which those institutions have been forming, this context is changing all the time as well. The role of stakeholders is changing, our technologies are changing, and but we're still stuck very much in silos, our sectors and sectoral thinking. A lot of the measures, as Sebastian also said, a lot of the work that is being done is very fragmented. It's almost ad hoc measures. And it's not adequate anymore. I think there's more and more an awareness as what we've been doing all this time has been good up to a certain point probably, but it's not adequate anymore. And that's where this vision comes in. And where the vision comes in, that this vision cannot focus only on just one aspect, not just on floods, not just on droughts, not just on spatial planning, but has to come with a broader look at the broader system. And that's where that's how it's interesting to bring in the ideas of systems thinking and resilience thinking. And that's what of course needs to happen on different levels. We're trying to implement that, but as the quote mentioned in one of these reports, it also has to trickle down in how we reorganize and restructure our institutions and how we collaborate among stakeholders, and how do we rethink our landscapes and the use of our landscapes for natural resources.
A great answer, and I think the idea that a vision can help really define this path that we need to be moving forward is really critical. I think it's also one of the central ideas that's embedded inside of RAF too, and thinking about what does a resilient landscape look like that's going to look different than things look today within these kind of new and emerging constraints, but also captures the insights, the buy-in too of of all of the stakeholders on that landscape and how they each have different roles to play in it. I'm going to move into our final summary. I think if you could move to the next slide, please. Key takeaways. I would like to say that we've heard some very, I think, remarkable stories from these three speakers. Michael really told us about how a company, one of these stakeholders, is actually trying to invest in the larger governance system itself, trying to strengthen the relationships, the institutions in which we share water across a system, and using that as a powerful vehicle for building resilience. Bonita told us about how even when we're just seeing a system that is starting to become in motion, that it's starting to evolve in some new directions, that we need to actually think about how new technologies, new decisions need to be enabled in conjunction with one another to prepare for long-term solutions. And often that's by trying to align issues such as water and energy together. And lastly, Sebastian, and then also articulated by Tom from Antea, this idea that taken together, stakeholders need to generate a kind of common vision for what is the art of the possible. What is, as these new conditions emerge, how do we prepare for them? And that may even be beyond the particularities of our knowledge, that we may be having to stretch into uncertainty. I would like to invite you as the audience to see RAF as a way to help encounter, to implement, to explore a resilience in this concept. And from my view, as an institutional partner on RAF, one of the co-authors, one of the co-developers in Agua, we see that this is a time of new problems that fundamentally require new solutions. And RAF is really, I think, on the vanguard of being able to help articulate what these new solutions can be, and to make these methodologies around resilience something that is fully operational. Thank you all. Thank you to the speakers, to the support team, and to you, the audience, for joining us. We're really grateful, and we'll hope that you will reach out, start a conversation, and engage with us in this dialogue globally and in your own system at home around resilience. Thank you.
Thank you all for the great session today. And thank you, John, for excellent moderation and timekeeping. It's exactly 1 hour mark. Magela, over to you now for the session recordings and all. If you have any questions, please contact us in the details there. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.